Imagine a world where we took all the running backs from the last 3 drafts, put them into one group, and then we're forced to rank and tier them accordingly for 2025 and beyond. Well, you don't need to imagine that, because that's what we're doing here today on the Fantasy Life Show. Myself, Ian Hardison, and of course, the one, the only, Dwayne "The Rock" McFarland. And Dwayne, kudos to you for the concept. And accordingly, man, let's get right into it with the top tier of running backs from the 2023 through 2025 draft classes: Ashton Jeanty, Bijan Robinson, and Jahmyr Gibbs. Look, we all love Jahmyr Gibbs. He helped win a lot of people a lot of money in fantasy championships here very recently, but really does seem to be a two-man race for this top honor. Dwayne, who are you leaning towards between Jeanty and Mr. Bijan?
Man, this is a true test of like convictions behind the rookie supermodel because Ashton Jeanty does grade at a 91 and Bijan Robinson's an 89. So like they're really close, like in the model. But like if we just look across the board real quick, production rating for Ashton Jeanty, 93. Everything in the supermodel is a scale of 50 to 100. We had an 85 for Bijan Robinson, so beat him there. Film rating, which is based on grades from Lance Zierlein, as well as career rushing and receiving grades from PFF, which we weight, is a 100 for Jeanty. On a scale of 50 to 100, it's a 100. It was a 92 for Bijan. So again, still really good. And then if we look at the speed score, Ashton Jeanty didn't run. So I had to give him a replacement speed, which kind of makes that one an unfair comparison. But obviously Bijan wins that one because he did run the 40 times. So here's the big question, right? How willing are you to lean into the model? Because comps similar to Ashton Jeanty, 100% of them in. All of them within their first 3 seasons put up a top 6 fantasy finish. So we feel really good, but there could still always be an outlier. And I will say this, with Bijan, we have already seen it. We have already seen Bijan make the transition from college to the NFL. In our show sheet, I did list Ashton Jeanty as the top guy. However, I would say this. I think there's really sound logic in saying that it should be Bijan just because he has actually proven it in the NFL. Jeanty still has to do it. Even though we feel great about all of his comps, like there's always that chance that we hit an outlier situation where it doesn't work out for Jeanty.
And that really is kind of the crux of this debate, okay? Like, we understand Jeanty, one of the best RB prospects out there. Real life analysts are going to tell you that. Fantasy guys like Dwayne and I are going to say the same thing. But with Bijan, we've seen it. We've seen it proven at the NFL level. And let's face it, Dwayne, not every single first-round running back, not every single highly lauded, quote-unquote, generational running back ends up being all that great. We've always pointed to the fact that, yeah, Jeanty just rushed for the second most yards in a single season of any collegiate running back not named Barry Sanders. How could he bust? Well, you know, the 2 guys that are underneath Jeanty in terms of that, Melvin Gordon and Kevin Smith. So not saying they weren't great in college, not saying they didn't have some good NFL success as well, particularly Melvin Gordon during some of his first years. But I do think if Ashton Jeanty ended up having more of a Melvin Gordon sort of NFL career, we'd be sitting there calling that a disappointment. So again, really does just come down to, especially in Dynasty land, like if you're in a Dynasty startup right now, Dwayne, still leaning with Jeanty because we do know with Bijan that he's a dog. He's got an offense willing to give him 365 touches. I mean, we could be sitting here in week 10 going, man, this Raiders team sucks.
Yeah, we definitely could. But we could be saying that about the Falcons as well. I feel pretty good about overall about their offensive weapons. But like, if you had to say it today, like the player that's guaranteed to at least be decent at quarterback is Geno Smith versus Michael Penix. I think the answer is Geno. Now, if you ask me the question of who's got the highest ceiling over the next 3 years, we probably lean to Penix, right? We're going to lean more to the unknown of saying, okay, we know what Geno is, but maybe Penix can turn into this, guy that have this higher ceiling. So I think, it's a really tough one to slice and dice. We obviously do have Bijan Robinson ahead of Ashton Jeanty in the ranks for this year. I am going to slightly lean to Ashton Jeanty, though. If I was in a startup dynasty draft today, I would take him over Bijan Robinson. Notice the tone of my voice there and the anxiety. It's filled with anxiety. The bottom line is Ashton Jeanty and Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs are all awesome. They're all in the same tier, and we love them all.
Speaking of Jahmyr Gibbs, he is again coming in RB3 in this theoretical exercise here, again combining all the running backs from the last 3 drafts into one looking ahead. That says, Dwayne did mention he is firmly in that same tier as Bijan and obviously Ashton Jeanty. So that really is the case with Jahmyr Gibbs, Dwayne. I guess the question I would say with Gibbs is, do we think at this point in time, considering the youth, considering what we've seen from him just on a per touch basis, Is Jahmyr Gibbs the best running back in the NFL? Because if he is, maybe we shouldn't worry about David Montgomery stealing, a couple hundred carries away, because he did that last year. And Gibbs still finished as the overall RB1. So for your money's worth in the year 2025, Jahmyr Gibbs, I love using this. Aliens invade the planet. We got to start someone at RB1. Is it Jahmyr Gibbs for you?
Yes. I think Jahmyr Gibbs, if he were able to, handle 275 rushing attempts and then be the full-time receiver and all those things worked out. Basically, if he was handed the role we're expecting for Jeanty and the role that Bijan Robinson already has, he would be in a tier by himself as the running back one. Like, he's just that electric. Now, you would expect him to lose some of that efficiency because the larger the workload you handle, we do see some of that deteriorate. But we've had guys in the past. Alvin Kamara is a great example where everybody expected this dramatic fall off once that occurred for him and he got that full-time role. And that didn't really happen until he started to get older. So I really do believe Jahmyr Gibbs is in that same vein as a CMC, same vein as what we have with an Alvin Kamara. So I would put him at the top of the list. I do think David Montgomery is good enough right now that we have to put him below Bijan. We have to put him below Jeanty. Yeah. But if he were to ever take over that full-time, that backfield full-time, I do think he would catapult to running back one from a talent perspective.
It is interesting to me, and I know they increased the touches, so maybe this, is a moot point of sorts, but when we did see Gibbs, really take over and emerge as the RB1 down the stretch in Fantasyland last season, he wasn't getting that 90% plus, snap rate that we actually see a lot of times, these players get. And like the Chase Browns of the world, you know what I'm saying, where they all of a sudden are able to just be on the field for every single snap. Last 4 games of the year for Gibbs, 69% snaps, 52%, 66%, 75%. Isn't it crazy that, again, Gibbs, who took over the fantasy playoffs, was the RB1 during that stretch, still might have left some meat on the bone, man? God forbid we ever left this guy on the field and just every down and said, F it, let's see what happens. Really is wild what this guy has done during the first 2 years of his career.
Yeah. Look, I don't have anything to add. Jahmyr Gibbs is awesome. And would it surprise me if he's the running back one in all of fantasy this year and they reduce the splits between him and Montgomery? No, it wouldn't, which is why I think we have this tier. And it's Jeanty, it's Bijan, and it's Jahmyr Gibbs. And I honestly don't think you can just sit here and say that it has to be any one of them. The answer is yes to all of them. And it's really your choice. They are all 3 really good players.
I do have a fun list before we go ahead and move on to tier 2 over here. Basically, this is your list of running backs to average at least 5 yards per carry during the first 2 seasons of their career with a minimum of 300 carries. Sorry, Jamal Charles was not personal, but here's the list. Devon Achane, Clinton Portis, Jahmyr Gibbs, Chris Johnson, Jonathan Taylor, Frank Gore, Barry Sanders, Adrian Peterson, Maurice Jones-Drew, Alvin Kamara, Eric Dickerson, Nick Chubb, James Cook, and he who should not be named, Ray Rice. Literally not one bust on that entire group, and maybe a little bit of love for Mr. James Cook as well. Although he does not qualify for this study, Mr. Achane does though. So plenty of thoughts ahead on the Dolphin speedster who can also catch a lot of passes out there right after a quick word from our friends over at Bud Light.
Check out the new whip.
Tight.
Fully custom.
How many Bud Lights can you fit in that puppy?
As many Bud Lights as it takes.
It's a lot of Bud Lights. You have to give me one of those.
Dwayne, we're talking about our next running back, kicking things off with tier 2. If all you knew about this player, you didn't know his size, you didn't know his name, you didn't know his team, but just the only 2 data points you knew was that year 1, he breaks the NFL single season record for yards per carry. And year 2, he catches 78 freaking passes. What are we doing here? Why is this guy not RB1 overall, for the next 5 years?
Look, I think that Achane is definitely in the conversation of should he be in the top tier? He's more like Jahmyr Gibbs than he is different. And you'll hear a lot of people point to last year. Yeah, but the efficiency came down with the workload. And while probably part of that is true, again, we just talked about that, a second ago when we were talking about Gibbs, if his workload expanded, some of that efficiency might go away. But the other thing is, we have a player that was dealing with an injury from early in the season, Ian. And so I think a lot of Achane's woes as far as the efficiency stuff goes probably ties back to the injury, not so much that the player necessarily lost their juice. So in a world where suddenly those 2 things combine this year, where you get that many targets and you get the sort of workload we saw last year from Achane, and then suddenly 90%, 80% of that juice that we saw in year 1 returns because he doesn't have the injury to deal with, we do have a player with a path to the running back 1 overall finish in fantasy football. So I think when you think about this tier, which real quickly to let people know who's in it, we've got Achane, Omarion Hampton, and Bucky Irving that we're going to be talking about here. I've got Achane at the top of this group.
I mean, you do look at that injury, and I still remember it, man. We had that, I think it was a Thursday night game, wherever, when he was kind of questionable. We had the high ankle thing coming in, went out there, gutted out, and we got the nice thumbs up from him, a couple, plays in, basically saying, I'm good to go out here. But yeah, man, I mean, you look at him throughout last year, he still averaged 4.5 yards per carry. Okay. It's not like this dude cratered into the low threes or anything like that. And again, I do think it's just that receiving upside that really does help separate things, particularly with so many fantasy leagues in full PPR territory these days. So we talked about Dwayne, with Devon Achane, even Jonnu Smith, like, okay, the Dolphins did force feed both these guys receptions almost, instead of Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Is that something they actually want to be doing again in 2025 and beyond? And I do think that, especially in Achane's case, I mean, we're looking at such a dynamic, different sort of threat as a receiver that, yeah, I do think there is a case to be made that we should just be buying into this. 34 receptions last year, Dwayne, from Achane, actually featured him being lined up in the slot or out wide. Alvin Kamara had 19. Bijan Robinson had 17. Those are the only other running backs in the league ahead of, the 13 mark. So again, Achane really is different in terms of what he can do as a receiver. We know he has game-breaking speed. And man, even just for this year, I know we've spent a lot of time talking about Jalen Wright and what he can be as the RB2 and how they only added Ollie Gordon and Alexander Madison. That's literally the depth behind Achane right now. He only had last year where Raheem Mostert banged up and not really doing much. Achane barely got over 200 carries. Who's to say we can't find that middle between year 1, year 2 efficiency? He averages around 5 yards per carry, actually gets 250 carries, and then we get these receptions, man. Modern day Marshall Faulk. That's what I'm hearing right now.
Yeah, and that's why in the ranks this year, I still have him ahead of Derrick Henry. I've got him ahead of Christian McCaffrey. I just feel like with the youth, that receiving profile, the fact there is, to your point, a chance that he gets even more work than what he got last year, and we see some of that efficiency return. I just think that he has that running back 1 overall potential in his range of outcomes more so than Henry. I think you can make the same argument for CMC. CMC is just, can he stay healthy and stay on the field? You could argue the 49ers offense may be not quite what it was 2 or 3 years ago, but at the same time, both players I like a lot, very similar profiles, but I'm going to lean to the younger guy in Achane.
I have a running Word doc this summer, and I'm just trying to, whenever we have good podcast moments or I'm writing an article, and, we do a lot of these, so sometimes easy to kind of forget some of these big conclusions. But Devon Achane, no matter what, point number 4, we're going to just remember that, as we get into these drafts. I'm with you. I do think he should be going ahead of those older backs, already proven to have some of the upside. So why not chase that youth, particularly when he might even just be scratching the surface of what he could be capable of. So again, guys, looking at all these running backs over the past 3 drafts, Tier 1, Ashton Jeanty, Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs. We do have Devon Achane kicking off that Tier 2. I think you could very easily argue he could be up inside Tier 1. But right behind Achane, Dwayne, I think this is really when the exercise gets interesting, because right now we do have incoming Chargers rookie Omarion Hampton sitting there, which, again, I don't necessarily dispute. We got Jim Harbaugh, we got Greg Roman. It's an ascending offensive line. I like Justin Herbert. I like Hampton as the prospect, but let's face it, if Hampton had gone 10 picks later or so, he probably wouldn't be getting this benefit of the doubt. And it just worries me when I go back, about a month ago and I look at our discussions around these running backs before the draft and how similar Hampton's, talent profile was to Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. So how much do you think, again, what we saw unfold over draft day truly now separates Hampton from those other fellow very good running backs?
Yeah, I mean, the rookie supermodel does call out Hampton as being slightly overrated versus his draft pick. And the way that we do that, there is a non-draft capital version of the rookie supermodel, which actually done really good. 0.71 correlation to future success over your first 3 years. With draft capital in it, it goes to 0.75. So obviously we want to give you guys the best thing. But still, we're kind of happy about our little rookie supermodel that's actually that close to NFL draft, even that good without NFL draft capital. It tells us that we're onto something. But it basically says that he should have been a high-end round 2 pick, which is what you're alluding to, which is where Quinshon Judkins went, which is also where Travion Henderson went. But at the same time, all of those guys have really strong hit rates, and we can't take away the draft capital because we now know that the GM They know we've got our round 1 pick invested in this guy. We've got to get him the rock, whether it's this year or whether it's next year where he takes over that full workload. I do think that's in the future for Omari and Hampton. You also have the coach with Jim Harbaugh. It's the perfect style of back for him. It's this big banger who can break these long plays. So I think the fit, when you look at everything there, I'm not too worried about it with Hampton. When you put the total equation together, Ian, I really do lean into the supermodel. That's why we made it. Top 6 finishes for backs that ranked in the same range as Omari and Hampton and the rookie supermodel. 73% of them went on to be top 12 running backs within their first 3 seasons. So that's just really bullish for him. Top 6 finish, not quite as high, 27%. And that's where you see the fact that he wasn't like this super high-end pass catcher in college. Hold him down from getting up into the range like what we just talked about with Jeanty, where we talked about Bijan, where we talked about Jahmyr Gibbs. He's not on their level. So for him to get a top 6 finish, the run out most likely is, oh my God, the Chargers are just badass. And the dude scored 15 rushing touchdowns and ran for 1,500 yards. More like a JT profile, right? JT didn't get into this conversation because we're just looking at the last 3 years. But I do think that Omari and Hampton, like the ceiling outcome we're looking for him, is really what we've had from JT.
Really is a ceiling, I guess, ADP that you're going to have to be getting Hampton with right now if you do look at just kind of startup dynasty ADP. We'll talk about the RB6 overall right now, man. There's Bijan, Gibbs, Jeanty, Saquon, then Achane, and then Hampton. And as much as I would want to say, that's crazy. This is a guy who didn't even know was going to go round 1. He could be stuck in a timeshare with Najee, at least for year 1. You start looking at the guys behind him, Breece Hall, Bucky Irving, Jonathan Taylor, Travion, Kyron Williams. And again, just trying to find that balance at the running back position is so hard because, again, it does have the shortest lifespan of any position in the NFL, and we see these guys fall off a cliff in a hurry. So why not go ahead and take your chances on the guy who just turned 22 in March, and again, still does have a solid profile for himself. So Hampton, again, I don't disagree with the placement. That said, Dwayne, if I am on the clock early, in a round 2 of a dynasty startup, maybe round 3, let me see exactly where he is usually going. Yeah, okay, but kind of that pick 23 overall, round 2, round 3 borderline. I don't see myself pulling the trigger on Hampton, man. I think at that point in time, give me the baller wide receiver, maybe even the baller onesie position that I can just feel better about over 8 years. Because, again, don't disagree with Hampton standing necessarily, but we see how quickly these things can change at running back in a matter of 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, I think it just depends on the wide receivers we're talking about in that range because the ceiling outcome for Hampton is still really strong. So like if we took Tet McMillan, for example, and I've got Tet McMillan, Travis Hunter, and Omari and Hampton all in a tier together for rookie drafts this year. I think you can really go which way you want. But when you look at those ceiling outcomes and the percentage of times guys like Hampton hit it, it's just a lot higher than what we see for Tet McMillan. Even though we love Tet, even though we love Travis Hunter, there's more variance with the range of outcomes for wide receivers. The model struggles with it more. The NFL struggles with it more. The hit rates on wide receivers for the NFL is also wider. So there's a path for Hampton that when I look at it, I just feel more conviction around his high end range of outcomes than I do for those other guys. Now, it doesn't mean that it won't work out for them and they don't end up being better. And to your point, like the trade-off is you get a shorter lifespan for the running back. Whereas if you do hit on Tet McMillan and he does 30% of his comps went on to be top 12 wide receivers. Okay. Not what we're talking about here when we talk about Hampton being at, over 70% of his comps becoming top 12 running backs. But if you did hit on Tet, theoretically, right, you're getting 8-9 years versus probably 4 to 6 years for Hampton. So I do see your logic, but I think that's why those guys group really close together in dynasty startups, because honestly, that's the trade-off you're making. I think a better known range of outcomes for Hampton, but you get longevity with the receiver.
And I will say I find myself, as I'm trying to explain this, falling into that age-old dynasty trap of always trying to prioritize, 4 or 5 years down the stretch when, believe it or not, guys, it's legal to try to win the championship in your first couple years of a dynasty startup. Some might even say that's an edge, when you're going up against guys that, again, just always seemingly want to be in rebuild mode. So good points there. And again, with Hampton, really is, a very good profile, just a matter of how favorably we do want to kind of, go for it. I think with our next running back, things get a little bit dicier because with Bucky Irving, he's awesome. I think his highlights last year, his ability to cut back across the grain, just force missed tackles. I mean, they are electric people, but I do have a pretty troubling list for you, Dwayne. Here are in the last 10 years, top 24 rookie running backs in terms of PPR points per game who were not drafted inside the first 3 rounds. Obviously, we have Mr. Bucky Irving. That's why I'm bringing it up now. Also, Dameon Pierce, Elijah Mitchell, James Robinson, Phillip Lindsay, Jordan Howard, and Carlos Williams. That's it. Now, I do think pretty much all those players, other than Elijah Mitchell, who just happened to benefit from Christian McCaffrey, wasn't even on the team yet, I guess. So someone got hurt. I think that was the year Raheem Mostert got injured on like his first freaking carry of the year. Trey Sermon didn't do anything. Okay, great. Those other offenses, I do not think are as good as the Buccaneers and what we've seen there. But from your perspective, what makes Bucky Irving different from these past late round RBs that we've seen bust? Because again, it's a situation where, man, he was special last year. Efficiency wise, we still never quite saw him get that full-fledged workhorse role until the very end of the season.
Yeah, I think when you look at Bucky Irving, it can be tricky because of the list that you just named. I think the biggest vote of confidence is the fact that they did not add anyone else, right, in the draft, even though we had this really deep class of running backs. Now, on the flip side of that, you could say, well, they didn't really need to because they've got Rachaad White, who can still do some things. Yeah, we don't necessarily love White, but like, you can put him on your roster. He can plug a hole. And then we've got Sean Tucker, who the team is also high on as a later round pick that they have on the team. He actually flashed in a big way last year whenever he got his opportunity as well. So you could say that even though this draft class was strong, they were just already at a spot where they felt really comfortable with what they had. So they pivoted to other positions. So when I look at Bucky Irving, the part that's nice, though, is I don't see Rachaad White taking the role back from him. So I think he's at least isolated for this year. I think the bigger risk to him is Sean Tucker. If for some reason Bucky Irving were to miss like 1 or 2 games and Tucker came in and played as well as what we saw last year, like it could force a split. But at the same time, I'm just not going to bet on that because Tucker's still a later round. I mean, actually, was Sean Tucker an undrafted free agent? I can't even remember if he was a late round pick or if he was undrafted free agent. So Bucky Irving, the problem here is that there's just not an incumbent right now on the roster that's worthy of really challenging him. So I think that gives him runway for this year. Now, if he flops this year, he's in trouble. But if he comes out and does what he did last year, he's going to have this opportunity to really solidify himself as the back of the future for the Bucs. So I just want to go ahead and lean into it. I would say this, like, I don't know that I would necessarily blame anyone if you wanted to make a tier break and move Bucky Irving down, right, to the next tier that we're about to talk about, which has got Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, because they've got much more secure draft capital. They're both early day 2 picks. That historically has been something where you're not going to see the team turn around the next year and say, oh, we're taking a first round running back. They might take, a 3rd round running back or a 4th round running back. But these two guys, they've got that early day 2 capital, which Bucky Irving doesn't have. So if you're looking at it from more of a floor perspective, I think you could make an argument that Irving should be moved down. I put him in the tier with these other 2 guys because honestly, he reminds me so much of Achane. Like he's this guy that like can really do it all. He's electric in the pass game. He's electric in the run game. And we've got an offense that we like.
And again, you're not going to find an advanced stat that paints him as anything other than a fantastic professional running back. But I will say, sometimes we go through all this and you have guys like Bucky, who was just, again, a late round gem or maybe a waiver wire darling. Kudos to you out there, a scholar who managed to get him on your fantasy football roster in the first place. But just a second, all you listeners out there, we appreciate you. Think to yourself, where did Bucky Irving finish last year in terms of PPR points per game among running backs? It was RB19, Dwayne. He was worse than Breece Hall, worse than J.K. Dobbins. And yes, he came on strong at the end. We see that from rookies a lot. But man, we're talking about a 72% snap rate in week 18, 69% in the wild card round. Before that, he was under 60% all but one game. It really took that Rachaad White 4th quarter fumble against the Cowboys for the Tampa Bay to finally go through it. Liam Cohen's out of town. Dave Canales left the year before. I do wonder, and Baker Mayfield is someone that we've, I think it was you said that could be experiencing a little bit of touchdown regression. He's been running a little bit hot. I do wonder if we had to again, and you look at historically, every year, top 10 scoring offenses, usually only about 5 or 6 of those repeat. I do wonder with the excess competition, everyone's a year older, Evans and Godwin, still all the turnover play caller. The Buccaneers maybe starting to sound a little bit like a trap to you.
I mean, they could be. They could be. I don't think it's enough, though, for me to want to move Bucky down because once Bucky did get that full-time role, and not even full-time, but just a starting role last year, man, he was a league winner for you. Like, I mean, we're talking about a guy that was throwing up 20-plus points on the regular. So I get it, like the average points for the season. But once we look at that point when they came out of the bye week, which is so funny to me. Why do we have to wait to the bye week to make these decisions?
Right.
I mean, literally, you're just saying we're going to give this guy some more plays. What do you do? Like a complete install with him and suddenly teach him parts of the offense he never knew before? I struggle to think that that's what's happening. But either way, once Bucky really did land in that lead role for the Bucs, and to your point, he never fully took it over. And I don't know that he will at his size. He's more of an H-N kind of guy. Man, the ceiling was just so high. I want to bet on the ceiling, but I can't disagree that there could be some trap components here with the Bucs offense overall. The other one that it reminds me of, Ian, is last year, C.J. Stroud, after the Texans added all those weapons, and we're like, C.J. Stroud to the moon. C.J. Stroud, I know it pains you to say this, Ian, and I know you've probably got it memorized, but what quarterback did he finish this last year? QB
28, Dwayne. 28.
28. It makes us all cry. So, yes, things can change in a hurry. And the Texans last year are a great example of, what we hope doesn't happen to the Buccaneers this year.
We'll give Bucky just a little bit of credit here. Not that I've been trying to take it away any, but from weeks 9 through 18, he was RB12 in PPR points per game. Okay. So certainly was, more so an RB1 as opposed to that low end RB2. Once we all finally wrapped our mind around him being a leader in Tampa Bay.
Let me ask you, Ian, though, like you're calling things out with him. Like, would you move him down a tier? That's what I feel like. I feel like in your gut, you're thinking H-N is probably a tier break above Bucky. You might even be saying Omarion Hampton, Bucky Irving, and Travion and Quinshawn who we're about to talk about, all belong together. Is that where you're at?
I think we move H-N up into tier 1, and then we have our next 4 backs: Hampton, Irving,
There's the real answer.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we could go with that. I like it. All right.
That's how I change things up just a little bit. Let's talk about Sean Tucker, though, here for a few minutes. We have time. He didn't exactly make this cut, but, he's certainly someone who's going to be far more of a late-round dart at this point. But, one of my favorite articles every year is when, our fearless leader over here at Fantasy Life, Matthew Berry, puts out his most interesting things he heard at the NFL Combine. And we did get an interesting nugget regarding Sean Tucker, where basically Matthew Berry was saying, per a source, he has a talent to be a number 1 RB in this league. The issue is just that he's stuck behind Bucky. However, Matthew said, reading between the lines of the conversation, I came away thinking they love Irving, they love Tucker, and aren't as enthusiastic about Rachaad White. I bet Tucker overtakes White for the RB2 role sooner rather than later. So Tucker, maybe not as reliable as Rachaad White, but my God, man, if you want to go ahead and move that rush attempt threshold low enough, Sean Tucker was literally the most explosive running back in the NFL in terms of his percentage of carries that went for at least 10 yards. So again, Bucky, great, we know that, but in your heart of hearts, Dwayne, you think Sean Tucker could take that job from Rachaad White?
I've split it evenly right now.
Nice.
I've got 60% of the carries going to Bucky Irving, but I have Rachaad White at 17% of the carries and Sean Tucker at 17%. Rachaad White's just a player I'm not interested in Dynasty startups, any kind of draft whatsoever. I just don't see the reason to draft Rachaad White. Obviously, there's a range of outcomes on these things. Something happens to Bucky, Sean Tucker fumbles the ball. Rachaad White could easily stumble into 15, 16 fantasy points per game. We know that, but it's just not the bet that I want to make. So I do like taking Bucky Irving. If I am taking a stab at the end of a draft and it's a running back from the Bucs, I'm typically going with Sean Tucker over a guy like Rachaad White, who's still honestly just priced too high.
Yeah. Sean Tucker, Marshawn Lloyd, Audric Estime, some of my favorite running backs right now that you want to, again, throw that literal round 17, round 18 dart at in best ball land. Dwayne actually did a draft on this very channel where you listen to us now yesterday. So make sure you check that out if you haven't already. But still some more running backs we want to get to. A pair of Ohio State studs who maybe find themselves in not so great situations. That said, first we have a quick word to our friends over at New Era. Get my Texans hat on. Shout out CJ and all the Iowa State Cyclones they got going over there. But everyone, you can watch the future of the NFL begin their journey with New Era Cap. As the world's top prospects chase their NFL dreams, New Era Cap is with them every step of the way. From the first pick to the final selection, feel the excitement build with each name called in Green Bay. Gear up and show your pride with the official onstage cap of the NFL Draft from New Era Cap. I teased it, Dwayne. A pair of national championship winning running backs out of the Ohio State University found their names called, within the first 10 picks of round 2 here this past NFL draft. Obviously, Travion Henderson and Quinshawn Judkins, both guys that I think people were wondering, could they sneak into the back half of round 1? Could they actually be the RB2 ahead of Omarion Hampton? Did not quite turn out that way, but hey, we're still talking about top 40 picks with great prospect profiles who could have put up bonkers numbers if they didn't, I guess just go ahead and decide to split the work and keep their legs a bit fresh again for that championship run and into their professional careers. So let's kick things off here with, I guess, TreVeyon Henderson and the New England Patriots, because this is the one where we do need to somewhat worry. Are we looking at a guy who, hey, is going to take over this backfield, going to be the clear-cut RB1? Because we're not talking about a pint-sized running back. Henderson certainly runs with some mojo, and yeah, he's explosive as heck, but man, he can work all three downs if you want him to. That said, we still do have Ramondre Stevenson there. I'm not even going to bring up Antonio Gibson. I understand that dream has died. My bad. I'll work on it. But between Stevenson and Henderson, Dwayne, like, how high do you think the ceiling here is? Because every time we hear the talk about Henderson, it seems like he's more of a change of pace back, which, yeah, that's great. But again, we just talked about Bucky and what he managed to pull off without a full workload. But do you think Henderson actually could tap into this 20-plus touch per game upside? Because, my God, if he combines that with some explosiveness, now we're talking about a guy that maybe could be threatening the Devon Achans of the world.
Yeah, and I think that's the comp you're looking at. It's getting him closer to a player like Achane. Achane was more polished as a receiver coming out, but we did see the flashes with Henderson. Henderson didn't get a ton of targets, but can you really blame Ohio State? I mean, when you've got Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Marvin Harrison Jr., Mecca Egbuka, it's like Jeremiah Smith, who's probably going to be like a top 3 pick once he comes out. There's just not a lot of passes that are going to go to these running backs. And the model accounts for that when we talk about the rookie supermodel. So Henderson, this is all just really about that big play ability. And I do think when you look at him, he's actually a guy that weighs more than Achane. He weighs more than Jahmyr Gibbs. So he's on the plus side of 200, a little bit more thickly built, down low as well. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity here. Now we've got Ramondre Stevenson, just got that new contract last year, but we've got a turnover in the staff here. We've got Mike Vrabel coming in as the head coach. We've got Josh McDaniels coming in. So it's just one of these situations where they could feel very differently about this backfield. I've got it right now split as like this 1A, 1B kind of scenario in the projections. If you guys haven't seen it, you can go over to fantasylife.com, and I just put out this piece that came out last week on rookie running back workloads using our new cool ceiling floor variance logic to kind of paint a range of outcomes. But using my projections as the baseline. And so for Henderson, I gave him 46%, or I gave 46% of the carries to Ramondre and 44 going to TreVeyon. So I still had Ramondre in a slight lead. He's the bigger back. He's the pounder. I can still see Vrabel being into that sort of thing. But even with that, Ian, the ceiling range of outcomes in this came out to 15.6 fantasy points per game. And all the variance logic does is it breaks down the key components that make up fantasy points for each position. And then it looks at which ones have the most variance and which ones have the least variance. And then the other really cool thing we did is we said, well, does it change based on the caliber of player? So a player that ranks in the 90th percentile for rushing yards per game, is their variance different than a guy that ranks in the 40th percentile? And the answer was yes. So whenever you start doing these projections, it immediately slots these players basically into these percentile ranges, and it starts handling the variance. And there are paths here to TreVeyon Henderson being a very meaningful player this year in fantasy. Now, his medium range of outcomes for points per game in a PPR league was 9.9. So there's also, you're not going to necessarily want to start that. So that's in the range of outcomes as well. The floor was 7.6, but you'll see that asymmetrical ceiling that you're getting with a player like Henderson. So I really do like it. And if we kind of zoom out with where we are, we're into the tier 3 of these backs. And just quick recap, people, we had Jeanty, Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, all tier 1. Ian making a case for Achane being including as well. But right now, tier 2, we had Achane, Omarion Hampton, and Bucky Irving. Now tier 3, TreVeyon Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. And one other thing I would add here, Ian, because we are talking about, hey, if this was like a startup and we're drafting today, how do we value these guys? To your point, you talked about it with Omarion Hampton earlier. You said how really his profile is closer to these guys. He did get a little bit of a bump because he went at the end of round 1 instead of sliding into round 2. But whenever you look at TreVeyon Henderson, man, 52% of his comps went on to put up a top 12 fantasy season in their first 3 seasons. So that's not like it's happened all the time, but that's a really good number. 76% of them went on to be a top 24, or what we would call in fantasy a running back 2 for your roster. So really strong comps here, and the way that the model looks at TreVeyon and the long-term outlook. And that ceiling potential for year 1 is probably a lot better than people think when I say 15.9 fantasy points per game.
And it's one of those things where that's assuming that we are going to see Ramondre so involved.
Yeah.
What if he's not? What if he's not? What if Mike
Exactly.
Vrabel's like, you know what? We drafted Travion Henderson, top 40 pick and everything. Like, okay, Breece Hall is bigger than Travion Henderson by a little bit. I'm actually getting the specific, measurements as we speak right now. But you said it, man. Travion, 5'10", 202 pounds. All right, 28th percentile BMI. Breece Hall, 5'11", 217, 57th percentile. Dwayne, if we're sitting here after week 1, week 2 of the preseason, again, we love looking at starter snaps in the preseason because it's just so much better depth chart purposes than we are, getting from the unofficial ones the interns put out and all that. I mean, if we see Henderson all of a sudden getting a Breece Hall-esque 65, 70% snap rate, working with the first team, Ramondre is more of like a clear number 2. Who's to say we shouldn't be drafting Henderson as a top 15 back at that point?
We will definitely be adjusting the baseline projections. And for you folks that are premium subscribers, and why wouldn't you be, you're going to have the ceiling and floor tool. It'll be baked into your ability to look at your starters for the week, thinking about trade scenarios, all sorts of stuff. So yeah, if we were to adjust that baseline and suddenly it's 55% of the rushing attempts going to Travion. Now, again, the model's partially handling that because it knows I could be wrong, right, in this projection for carries, because what it's doing, it's looking at the yards I have projected for Travion. And it's saying, really, there's a range of outcomes based on those yardage and based on the yardage, the receptions and the touchdowns and all those things. So some of it's baked in, and I would probably say the high end would be giving Travion 55% of the carries. But to your point, if we did baseline Travion's carries at 55% of the attempts, obviously now we would get a new range of outcomes that would have an even higher ceiling that would probably get some people really, really excited that would be more like in that 18 fantasy points per game range.
Now, again, Henderson, love the talent. Not that we don't Quinshon Judkins, but I think with Judkins, we're a little more wary of what he can bring to the table as a pass catcher. Probably actually have higher expectations in terms of the immediate workload he's going to be carrying, just in terms of raw touches per game. But I do think, honestly, for both players, more so the Browns, we do need to keep in mind that this is a really bad offensive environment, okay? And as much as, great running backs can overcome some badness from their teammates from time to time, I mean, look no further than last year's free agent class when we saw Josh Jacobs, Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry put up middling to really bad efficiency numbers in their previous employer, all of a sudden find that the grass was a heck of a lot greener on the other side. So things went great for them, but I just worry, Dwayne, with someone like Quinshon Judkins, where, look, he's awesome. He just got drafted, 35th overall pick for a reason. If he wasn't going to go there, he was going to go soon after. The NFL has identified Quinshon Judkins as a really good running back. How much does that matter when you're playing in Cleveland? Because as we've seen over the years, man, again, the list I just named, stuff can go bad for running backs in a hurry if they're in a bad offensive environment. And right now, if you had to rank the bottom 3 in the league, I'm pretty sure we would put Cleveland in there.
Yeah, I just struggle to, if I'm thinking about a startup, to move Quinshon any lower than this. There's certainly risk, with the offense, but I still think that Kevin Stefanski is a plus coordinator. I think he showed us that multiple times in the past. I do think that Joe Flacco could be serviceable enough to make this offense average if they decided they wanted to run the ball more. And I think that's a really easy path that we could see here. They don't have the quarterback quality on their team is obviously a big question. I mean, maybe Shadur Sanders or Dylan Gabriel, one of these two guys can step forward this year and all of a sudden surprise us. But our expectations are pretty low for the quarterback room. At the same time, we have seen coordinators like Stefanski lean more into the run, use more play action, do all these sort of things, try to really win in the passing game through efficiency and big plays versus trying to go out there and actually just run all of these passing plays, which was a shift Stefanski made over the last few years because of the investment in Deshaun Watson. But I think now they're turning the page on that. And that gives me some hope for the way they want to operate the offense. They still have a pretty good defense. So I think the path here, if we're just talking X's and O's and football and the way this could all play out, is the Cleveland Browns still have a pretty good defense, right? And so they could play in some of these close games if their quarterbacks don't lose the game for them. And in that path, then we would see more rushing plays for the Browns. And the cool thing about it is, even when Stefanski was run heavy before they made this, before they switched to Deshaun and decided to start throwing the ball so much, they still ran a lot of plays per game. So their tempo has always been a positive thing with Stefanski. A lot of times you see a run heavy team and it just kills the plays per game, right? But we didn't see that in the past with Stefanski. So I think there's some positives here, but ultimately this is a talent bet, right? And your talent bet, whenever you're looking at Quinshon Judkins, not quite where we were with Travion, Ian, but top 12 finishes, 45% of his comps got there within the first 3 years. 68% became running back twos or top 24 running backs. And then 91% were at least top 36 finishes catches within their first 3 years. So not quite as strong as Travion, but still in a really solid spot. And if you look at looking at the workload projection stuff that I did, his ceiling projection came in at 16.8 fantasy points per game in a PPR, and his median came in at 11.1, which was actually higher than what we had with Travion, even though we are a little bit worried about the offense, which is baked in to what's happening with the model because we use a top-down approach. I projected what I think is going to happen with Cleveland, right? And then that feeds down to what we have for the players.
To be fair, Browns offense really hasn't been good for quite some time. I think you could say relative to the rest of the league. They had a good offensive line going for a couple of years there, but obviously Nick Chubb, to a slightly lesser extent, Kareem Hunt, still managed to do good things. And even last year, Dwayne, I'm really surprised to see Jerome Ford's name at the top of some of these leaderboards in terms of efficiency. Only had 104 carries, but 5.4 yards per pop in that offense. I mean, I know we're giving Stevenson quite a bit of credit in New England. Do you think there's a chance for writing off Jerome Ford a little bit too early? I'm not saying he's going to keep Quinshaw on the bench or anything like that, but let's face it, if we are all of a sudden dividing this backfield 40-40-20, that's going to be problematic for all parties involved.
Well, I mean, I gave Quinshaw 55% of the carries, but I only gave him a 30% route participation, which is lower than what I did for Travion for the reasons that you spoke about. So I'm assuming that it will be Jerome Ford getting some of the passing down work, and then Dylan Sampson maybe eating up a little bit of that work, and then also relieving Quinshaw Judkins some as well. I projected it as being a situation where Quinshaw gets most of the early down work, but is leaving the field on third downs, 2-minute offense, all that type of stuff, really being divvied up between these other backs.
Just please, Cleveland, Kevin Stefanski, more about football. You'll forget more than I ever know. I get that. Pierre Strong Jr. on the bench. All right. I don't want to see this guy's name out there taking carries from any of these guys. You got 3 good ones. You used 2 draft picks in the top 4 rounds. Just please chill on Pierre Strong Jr. But more rookies, specifically one who landed in the absolute nut landing spot, talking about the Denver Broncos ahead, guys. But first, a quick word from our friends over at Bud Light.
Hey, you're not actually allowed to drink in a beer commercial?
Since when?
You gotta wait till it's done.
5,
4, 3, 2, 1.
R.J. Harvey, Dwayne, one of the many mid to late round running backs that seemingly everyone on draft Twitter loved. And honestly, I'm yet to find a running back that draft Twitter didn't love throughout this entire process. All right. So I'm not trying to put down R.J. Harvey. Super explosive, everything he did at UCF. I believe he didn't even start playing running back until college, as we see with a lot of teams, a lot of players. The high schools, you have a future D1 athlete. You put them at quarterback so they can touch the ball every single play. So, certainly could be just a late bloomer of sorts, and again did some really good things there. But when I see Dane Brugler, I see our own Thor Nystrom comping him to Tajay Spears, I just wonder if we're getting a little bit too excited about a guy who was only a few picks away from going in round 3, that we really were never thinking of this highly until he got to the landing spot. So with RJ Harvey, Dwayne, a little bit long in the tooth. All right. We've had this battle going on in the fantasy Twitter streets, particularly in the Dynasty community, talking about all the busts who were going to be, these day 2 picks, but were 24 or older by the time the season started. Thoughts on Harvey as a prospect? How concerned are you with the age, if at all? And do you think that, again, the landing spot and the draft capital are enough to make up for perhaps a flawed profile, at least relative to who we usually see go with a top 64 pick?
Yeah, and that's why we have a tier break moving down from the 2 guys we just talked about with Travion and Quinshaw Judkins. I do think there's more risk with Harvey's profile. So if you look at him from a supermodel perspective, the guys that graded out in a similar range to him, top 6 finishes 7% of the time. So I'm saying there's a chance, right? Okay. The top 12 finishes, this is the one I want to talk about, 19%. We just talked about Quinshaw Judkins. His comps were at 45%. Travion's were over 50%. Omari and Hampton's were over 70%. So we're making a big step down. And you have to remember here, Sean Payton fell in love with this guy. So we could look at that as a good thing, or we could look at it as a bad thing. But I think the question we have to ask ourselves, Ian, is would RJ Harvey have even been a round 2 NFL draft pick if Sean Payton wasn't sitting there waiting to take him where he did? I think he thought there was too much of a risk to pass him and wait another round, and he wouldn't get him. So he went after the guy. So on one hand, that's good. It's also good that we know Sean Payton, man, can dial up passing opportunities for a running back like nobody's freaking business. Guys, if Ian went and signed with the Broncos today, and you're like, who's this freaking I Heartits dude? Ian would have a 28% targets per route run. for the Broncos as a running back. It's what Sean Payton does. He designs all this stuff, so you don't even necessarily have to be an elite receiving running back to get these looks. Now, if you're an Alvin Kamara, if you're a Darren Sproles, which is another level, he's going to use you even more. So it's a really good landing spot. It's a big vote of confidence from Sean Payton, but at the same time, the model did see him as being someone that should have gone a little bit later. Now, again, look, this is not like to I'm not sitting here trying to bash RJ, because I'm fixing to say a couple really good things about him. But whenever you look at him, in the rookie supermodel, Ian, there were some things here that are very positive. 21% of his carries went for 10 plus yards or more at the collegiate level. That is absolute fire. The average NFL draft prospect since 2017, that number is 14%. So he's absolutely blowing that out of the water. Very explosive. Missed tackles force per attempt. 31%. That's in the 73rd percentile. So I definitely think that the talent is there with RJ Harvey to create some of these big plays and do some of these things. I think the question is, what do we think this workload is going to look like? Because the assumptions that I'm seeing sometimes out in the social media streets, is oh my God, everything's going straight to him. And while I think that's in the range of outcomes, I was a little bit more prudent, in my opinion, in the way I handled it. I gave him 45% of the rushing attempts for the team and 40% route participation rate. And people are probably sitting here going, "What? You're a complete moron." Maybe I am, but I also know that Sean Payton has a heavy history of rotating these guys, even guys we didn't know, man. Even guys we didn't know. Look how long it took for Mark Ingram to get a full-time workload, right? I mean, there's a lot of guys that have played for Sean Payton that were stuck in these rotations. So I put him at 45% of the attempts, 40% route participation. But here's the beauty of it, Ian. Our variance logic handles all the rest. It's almost like Jesus, take the wheel. That's what we're saying. We're giving him this baseline. Dude, his ceiling projection is 17.1 fantasy points per game. That's better than what we just talked about with Quinshon Judkins. That's better than what we just talked about for Travion Henderson in year one, right? These are just year one projections. So I think RJ Harvey, the bullish way to look at him is what he's going to do in this first year on a weak depth chart. And I could be under projecting his baselines. If I'm thinking a startup, and I'm thinking about long-term where I want to be, and you also talked about the age, I still lean to Quinshon Judkins as well as Travion Henderson being the prospects I would want to put my chip on.
During his time with the Saints, Sean Payton's best performing running back in terms of PPR points per game finished RB 18 or better in all but one season. Last 2 years with the Broncos, Javonte RB 31 and RB 37. Obviously not exactly what fantasy managers were hoping for, but coming off that knee injury, I think anyone that was watching that film could tell. Unfortunately, Javonte was a shell of his former self. So again, man, really isn't even about him getting that full 3-down workload. But as you said, if he does get close, man, all of a sudden we're talking about this kind of mid-tier RB2 price tag, at least for drafts this year, all of a sudden not looking all that costly in the first place. I will say one of the concerns I could find, just trying to be devil's advocate here, we are talking about PFF's second worst graded pass blocking running back among 124 qualified FBS RBs, but I'm not trying to hate on PFF, former employer, appreciate them. I'm actually a bigger fan than PFF grades than most, but they also said Travion Henderson was outside the top 80 running backs in their pass blocking grades. So maybe people are, overreacting to some of the highlights that Henderson puts forward and not the consistency. But again, one of these things, Dane Brugler says he's a below average pass blocker. I think that's probably closer to what it is, but it really is, can he unlock that receiving side of things? Certainly shown flashes, but that is, I would say, the skeleton key to becoming just his fantasy superstar and Sean Payton's Broncos offenses, at least at this point in time. Last point on Harvey, Dwayne. Do you think it's interesting that RJ Harvey, who again, people liked him, but pretty much considered round 3, maybe even more likely a day 3, draft pick before things were getting, before the draft was going underway. He gets nice draft capital, picks 60 overall, and all of a sudden we say, great landing spot, RJ Harvey. Now he's going, freaking round 5 of drafts. Meanwhile, 14 picks later, the Broncos take another player who no one expected to go this early, and Pat Bryant at wide receiver, also in a great situation, also with Sean Payton, who we've seen get a lot out of late round wide receivers. And it's like no one really even cares about Pat Bryant still, okay? He's moved up a little bit, but man, why is Harvey getting so much more steam than someone like Pat Bryant?
Because it's so much easier for a running back to come in and succeed at the next level than it is for a wide receiver. A wide receiver has to be able to beat press coverage, be on the same page with their quarterback, read zone versus man, read the way like a linebacker is drifting, the way a safety is potentially like jumping down to jump a route. And the quarterback has to fully be able to trust them. And then they've got to be able to catch the ball, right? They've got to be able to take a hit. There's all these sort of things that you have to do to earn your quarterback's trust. And there's just a wider range of outcomes on these wide receivers, which is why the running back model is stronger than the wide receiver model, which is why NFL draft capital is a stronger signal for future production for running backs versus wide receivers. So I think there's good reason with why RJ Harvey is moving up so much and not Pat Bryant. Now, having said all of that, I do think Pat Bryant, not to go on like, we're talking running backs here today. I do think the wide receiver 2 role is wide open right now in Denver. And Pat Bryant is another player. Sean Payton essentially said, screw every draft board or mock draft you guys have ever seen. And he just took the players where he wanted them. Like 2 rounds. If you look at mock drafts as being kind of and they're not always perfect guys, but if you look at them as kind of being a roadmap, like he reached 2 rounds on Pat Bryant. He reached a round on RJ Harvey. So that could be a negative or a positive, right? Those guys could have fallen further, but at the same time, like you could also look at it as like, well, wow, Sean Payton liked him and he wants to get him involved in his offense. So I think there's truth like in for both of these players in what you just said. I do think it's easier for RJ Harvey. We should be more excited about it, but we also shouldn't be dismissing what he did with Pat Bryant.
Again, guys, ranking all the running backs from the last 3 draft classes below the Ohio State products. We did have a tier break going to RJ Harvey and then Caleb Johnson, who did earn that day 2 draft capital with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Dwayne, unfortunately, don't have time to dive into all the intricacies with Caleb Johnson. Yeah. So again, did want to give him a shout out and, obviously poised to really inherit that Najee Harris role. Maybe in the best case scenario becomes Arthur Smith's new Derrick Henry. Very explosive runner between the tackles, should fit in that outside zone scheme nicely. Albeit Jalen Warren still around, still there to possibly take some of that pass down work, and we don't love the environment. So I do think Caleb's standing is nice. So with Caleb and Harvey there, okay, we had another tier break, and after that, Zach Charbonnet, Trey Benson, Bashaw Tootin, Cam Scatterbo, Tank Bigsby, Tajay Spears, Jalen Wright, Blake Corum. Out of those last 8 running backs I named, in 30 seconds, Dwayne, give me the one who you think has the best chance of maybe leaping up a tier or 2 by the time the season's over.
Yeah, I think it's Tootin, explosive playmaker, solid in the passing game. So I would make it him. But I will just say on Caleb, I have to say something because this is going to be the one that is most polarizing for the whole show. Like we probably should have started with Caleb Johnson. I do believe he is getting steamed more than any other running back, even RJ Harvey, by his landing spot. And I gave him 53% of the rushing attempts out of the gate. The problem is a guy that broke 13% of his tackles for 10 plus yards or more. Ian, that's below the average for an NFL prospect. You look what he did as a receiver, his best receiving yards per team pass attempt, also not very good. So it's a good landing spot. He lands in Pittsburgh. Najee's gone, but also he's got a pretty thin skill set, right? He kind of has to like hit it just right to be the guy that to be the player that everyone wants him to be. So I think he's getting steamed up a little bit high, not near the hit rates of the other guys that we're talking about with Quinshon Judkins, Travion Henderson. So I will say Caleb Johnson is the most overrated running back right now in dynasty startups, in rookie drafts, actually just in fantasy football period for rookies. And that's not saying I hate him. Guys, you can go check out the workload article. He's got a good range of outcomes. I know I already went too long, but he's just getting steamed too much.
And the thing I think people are missing a little bit is this idea that Caleb's going to be the one. Oh my gosh, they've had Najee. Now they can have some explosiveness. Guys, it brings me no pleasure to report this, but the only running backs with more 20-plus yard runs than Najee over these last 2 years, Derrick Henry, Saquon, and Gibbs. That's it, okay? He has a lot of runs that get stuffed as well, but I don't think explosiveness is necessarily the problem. I know his career long rush is 37 yards, okay? Alvin Kamara hasn't broken a run longer than 30 yards since 2020, okay? So again, don't hold everything against Najee quite as much as y'all are. Free Najee, all right? I can't believe that's where I ended up going with that. So, hey, cut that end of it. I'm just kidding. We'll finish. So, Caleb Johnson, we'll see what happens.
Go to the music.
Go to the music. Guys, appreciate you tuning in as always. We got way more ahead of us this week and beyond to the upcoming summer months here on the Fantasy Live Show. Otherwise, just have a great freaking day. So, for Dwayne, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning into the Fantasy Live Show. Until next time, take care, everybody.